Postmodernity, what is it? We hear a lot about it. We hear politicians talk about postmodernity. We hear philosophers talk about it. We hear preachers talk about postmodernity. But just what is postmodernity and what does it mean for us living in this present age? Postmodernity is a philosophical and political construct of Western thought. It was born in the philosophies of German and French universities. And it has, since those early days, become a primary way of understanding the age in which we live. It has a political and economic construct that is presented in Thomas Friedman's book, The World is Flat. If you're living in Georgia and you call your credit card company and someone in India answers the phone to assist you, that's Friedman's understanding of a flat world in which there are no national boundaries, a flat world in which everything is on a level playing field. The trade agreements that were negotiated in the 1980s and 1990s, anytime you hear free trade, what you're hearing is an economic example of postmodernity. What we're seeing in the migration of peoples across borders, where entire populations are moving from one geographical location to another. That is an example of postmodernity, when nation states, the borders of nation states, practically no longer exist. It is the deconstruction of an old world paradigm. If I were to give you some biblical metaphors of what postmodernity is, I would offer two. The first is Babel, where humanity seeks to build civilization based upon one story, based upon unity. But God intervenes and confuses the languages and scatters the people. Postmodernity is a contemporary example of Babel, in which the stories that once united cultures no longer exist, or they no longer unite the cultures. They're being rejected, and instead of a singular story, instead of a singular ideal that unites the nation, for example, in the United States, the Declaration of Independence and the Constitution of the United States, those documents simply don't serve a postmodern reality. And so what we're looking for is new ways of doing politics, new ways of doing economics. Postmodernity is one of the reasons we're seeing a rise in socialism in the West right now. It is the deconstruction of old ways. The world is flat. Everything is equal. Everyone is equal. Babel means that there are many stories and many languages, and none of them have priority. They're all equal, and because they're all equal and because none have priority, it seems as if confusion and chaos reigns the day. That's postmodernity. Another biblical metaphor for postmodernity would be the exile. When the Babylonians, again that word Babel, when the Babylonians invaded and destroyed Jerusalem and burned Jerusalem, with the destruction of Jerusalem was the destruction of God's covenant with the people of Israel. No longer did they have a law that identified them as the people of God, or a sitting king that identified them as the people of God. They were exiled into Babylon, and they began to speak Babylonian languages. They began to eat Babylonian food. So we get this example of postmodernity from Babel and the exile as the deconstruction of a long-held economic, philosophical, religious tradition. Postmodernity is the grandchild of the Enlightenment. The Enlightenment was itself a type of postmodern movement in which the enlightened thinkers were rejecting the way that Europe had been constructed. If I were to give one word that in my mind defines postmodernity, it would be disillusionment. Postmodern thinkers, postmodern citizens are disillusioned with the modern experiment. It is the failure of the Enlightenment. In the Enlightenment, It was thought that if we could do away with the monarchies of Europe, if we could do away with the Protestant and Catholic religions of Europe, and we could have a new type of government and a new type of religion, or even the abolishment of religion, then we would have a peaceful, flourishing, prosperous society. But World War I and World War II destroyed the concept of the Enlightenment forever. So when we're talking about postmodernity, we're talking about disillusionment. Disillusionment with modernism. Disillusionment with economies and nation states and science and religion. Disillusionment with rationalism, that human mind should be able to understand everything. The atomic age was the height of modernism. We have conquered the atom, but in conquering the atom, we also deconstructed modernism because we understood that modernism could not contain itself. We understood that things were being deconstructed, that with the height of modernism, that it posed entirely new threats, even possibly the extinction of humanity. So it brings this disillusionment with modernism. It is also a disillusionment with religion. In Western thought, the experience of religion in the West, frankly, has been one of a mixed bag. I personally believe that the Christian faith contributed greatly to the development of Europe and to Western thought. I personally believe that we can say that Christianity is the key, that the story that united Europe, the story that saved Europe, and the story that will save the world. But the other side of that is a false Christianity that is used to serve the economy of the state, ended up developing wars. Consider World War II. World War II was a massive conflict in which Christians from the United States and England were battling, doing warfare with Christians from Germany and Italy. Regardless of what World War II cemetery you go to, whether it's an American, English, German, or Italian, a cross will mark the grave. I'm not suggesting that World War II was a significant religious war, but we cannot discount the fact that the Christian faith failed to bring peace to the European continent. I would suggest it's because we've misunderstood the Christian faith and we have neglected to focus on the eschatological promises of the Christian faith. But nonetheless, the Christian religion in Europe failed to bring flourishing and peace to the continent. And so there is a disillusionment. In fact, many will suggest that the decline of the Christian faith in Europe is a result of centuries of religious warfare. So postmodernity is an expression of the disillusionment with religion. This one may somewhat shock you, but postmodernity is also disillusionment with science. The more we know about the atom, the more we know about science has not contributed to the flourishing of humanity. The fact is, we know more now as a people, as humanity, we know more now than we ever have. But poverty still reigns. Warfare still reigns. We don't like the concept of the fallenness and the brokenness of humanity, and modernism and science and philosophy has not remedied that brokenness of humanity. Another word that we can use to talk about postmodernity is deconstruction. The deconstruction of traditions. Everything can be torn down. Everything has failed. The modern experiment has failed. Religions have failed. So we just need to tear them all down and start new. Therefore, you have in theological circles people that are working to deconstruct the Christian faith. You have the deconstruction of politics, the deconstruction of philosophy. Specifically with Christianity, the deconstruction of the historic Christian faith in search of a new Christian faith. Now, I don't believe this. I'm just telling you what it is. And I do think that there are responses, and we'll talk about the responses in a moment. The other thing that is signifies postmodernity is the deconstruction of science to serve the political and philosophical construct of postmodernity. Let's talk about this for a moment. What do we mean when we're saying even the deconstruction of science? Well, let me give you an example. I believe that what we see now in the redefinition of human sexuality, it deconstructs the tradition, it deconstructs human religious truth, it deconstructs traditional science. In any 10th grade biology class, they teach evolution. The theory of evolution suggests that the purpose of evolution is the flourishing of the species. Certain species, certain forms of life have developed sexuality as a way of procreation, propagating the species, the flourishing of the species. Anything that does not contribute to the propagation and flourishing of the species contributes to the death of the species, and therefore, according to evolutionary theory, is bred out of the species. Homosexuality cannot contribute to the procreation or the flourishing of the species. So even if homosexuality is a product of DNA, nonetheless, it cannot contribute to the flourishing of the species because it cannot reproduce itself. But with the postmodern scientific deconstruction and reconstruction, we're now developing many ways of understanding human sexuality so that it's not just male and female, it's not just polygamous or monogamous or heterosexual or homosexual, but we're inventing all sorts of ways to politically and philosophically redefine humanity that defy normal 10th grade biology. It defies the received science. So we're having to create a new science that serves the political and philosophical construct of the agenda at hand. We see some responses, some political responses to postmodernity. Brexit, when the United Kingdom, the citizens of the United Kingdom voted to leave the European Union. This is a pushing back against postmodernity, a redefining of nationalism, a redefining of national borders, of national interests. The same thing happened in the United States with the election of Donald Trump. Another example of a pushback of postmodernity is radical Islam. It could also be a fundamentalist version of Christianity that embraces violence and embraces hate. So you see these political responses. I would suggest that there is a Christian response to postmodernity. And this Christian response in postmodernity is exhibited in the two flourishing branches of Christianity throughout the world, Catholicism and Pentecostalism. Now, one would think that they are utterly divergent, but both of these religious traditions give something necessary to the flourishing of the human soul. Catholicism offers a story, a tradition. It offers a solid foundation for those who are worshiping Christ within that religious tradition. It provides continuity with the past, and it provides hope for the future. The same way Pentecostalism, a mature Pentecostalism, provides a trans-rational, not simply a rational Christianity, one that can be understood and reasoned, but something that is trans-rational. The way we Pentecostals like to talk about it is it changes our affections, or the way we would say it in church, I can feel it deep down in my soul. And it remedies the disillusionment. So we do have a Christian remedy for the disillusionment and the despair of postmodernity. It is in the ancient story of Jesus, the ancient story of Christianity, and it is in the present reality encountering God and the power of the Holy Spirit. So we can dance and we can sing, and in the midst of all the despair and in the midst of all of the anger, we can offer hope for the future.